Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I'm a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion focuses on tenant attach, which is a component of Configuration Manager, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. This is a topic that I've actually discussed in brief before in a previous session, but I wanted to come back to it and dedicate a whole session to it because it is something that is important enough to do that and has matured a little bit more from whenever we initially discussed it, and so we'll frame it here. So, as with all of our sessions, here's the kind of agenda that we will follow to talk about what tenant attach really is, why you would care about it. I want to show you the requirements for tenant attach, talk about several integration pieces with tenant attach. So, this is being based on Configuration Manager Current Branch 2103. With every release of Current Branch, we are adding more for tenant attached. So certainly there will be other things added beyond this, but there's been enough added to it now that I definitely want to show it to you. Talk about how it works, right, and then show you various things actually happening, and we'll wrap up with troubleshooting tips and tricks. So what is this thing called tenant attach? Well, so a little bit of history to kind of get into this. A couple of years ago, I think, at the time of this recording now, it was mentioned in an Ignite address by Brad Anderson that we would be uh, launching a rebrand effectively of the management suite called Endpoint Manager. So config manager, we still refer to config manager, we still refer to Intune, but really those products don't exist anymore. They are both under the umbrella of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Both of them uh, live in partnership, right? And so as part of that, one of the uh, one of the mentions leading up to that announcement was that we would be releasing it was called a web console. So David James was tweeting that customers had been requesting a web console for Configuration Manager for some time, and that they would finally see that come to reality. Well, what he meant was the Microsoft Endpoint Admin Center would then become a console based in the web that could be used to trigger and create and manage many administrative functions in the config manager environment as well as in the MDM environment. So what you will still hear me refer to as the Intune console really isn't the Intune console anymore. It is the web-based console for managing both config manager clients and Intune managed devices through MDM. And we'll see that as we go along. To make this happen, you need to do this thing called tenant attach. Tenant attach really means connecting your configuration manager infrastructure to the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. So here you're going to upload devices of your choosing. You don't have to do all devices, or you can, so that they appear in and can be managed from the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. Now, um, are there any characteristics of those devices that need to be in place before you can do that? And the answer is no. We can put all the devices up there that are managed by Config Manager. So is it only a device managed by Config Manager? Good, no problem. We can synchronize that into the Admin Center. Is it a device that's managed by Intune only? Well, of course, that's going to be in the Admin Center. And then what about co-managed devices? Are those okay? Well, absolutely, they're okay. They're not required. Co-management is not required at all. Although, interestingly, you'll see in a second that setting up tenant attach happens through the co-management configuration pages in the Config Manager console, but co-management itself is not a requirement, right? So why do we, if we can do this, right? Why do we care to do it? Why do we care about tenant attach? Well, there's a number of reasons that you might bring into this discussion. I'll mention a few, right? Unified management is for sure one that might be of interest, so that people using the consoles or trying to manage devices in your infrastructure really only have to do it in one place, right? Manage your Intune, see and manage your Intune enrolled devices, see and manage your config manager enrolled devices, and also your co-managed devices. It could be. I didn't put this on the slide, but I think of scenarios such as help desk operators or those in the business that really don't need a config manager console, but would benefit from being able to see the entire management landscape and see some of the data related to that and do certain things that are exposed through tenant attach, right? Certain business groups that might have responsibility for a certain set of devices, but not others, right? So there's a lot of potential scenarios that you could place in this discussion about why tenant attach, right? Why you care, and I'll leave that to you. Another thing, in this one, there's a piece of this that I struggled a bit whether to include in this session or whether to include in another session I'm going to do, probably the next one that I'm going to do after this one, where I talk about cloud attach kind of components of Config Manager and so on. I will basically, I'll mention this here because I don't, again, I struggled whether to put it here or in the other session. I'll definitely mention it in the other session. But there are, in some ways, this is jumping ahead, but I want to make sure I cover this. There are certain capabilities in Config Manager that will benefit most customers, and most customers will use software distribution, software updates, hardware inventory, things like that, right? But then there's certain optional features that customers can, hey, optionally use. And there are certain of those that, well, I've never recommended those optional features be applied in mass to all customers until the Cloud Management Gateway. And now the same applies to tenant attach. Why? And I say tenant attach loosely because what I'm talking about here is not really associated with tenant attach, but it's kind of in the same way of thinking. So you're not going to hear me detail in this session beyond right now this idea that I'm going to describe. But again, it's really important. So one of the challenges as folks transition into the Azure-based environment and look at Intune and what it can offer, had many discussions with customers about groups, right? So in Config Manager, we will organize things into collections, devices, users. In Azure, we will organize those same devices and users into Azure AD groups. Intune leverages those. And so as folks transition to or begin using Intune, they sometimes feel a little bit hemmed in, if you will, or limited by the fact that you can't do with Azure AD groups the same level of complexity and granularity of what you can achieve with collections. And so often the conversation will come in, how do we do this or that, or strategize this or that with Azure AD groups, because we've always used collections to do this or that, right? Well, the one piece that I think raises the bar of tenant attach or cloud attach management to the level that every customer needs to do this is the fact that with Config Manager collections, you can flag a given collection so that it will replicate to Azure AD groups. In other words, the Config Manager collection membership will be replicated up to Azure AD and reflected in the Azure AD group. When the collection membership changes in Config Manager, then that will also be replicated forward to Azure AD groups. And so all of a sudden, those limitations or challenges to find a way to do things in Azure AD groups that you historically have done in collections, now that's gone, right? And so that ability alone to be able to replicate your collections forward to Azure AD groups is huge, right? Again, I struggled with whether to put this here in this session or talk about it in Cloud Attach, so I guess I'm talking about it in both. But that's certainly one thing, and it makes me think about it when I see Azure AD groups and collections, because another thing as to why tenant attach is you can decide what collections you want to upload into Intune, or into Azure AD groups so that they can be used. Sorry, I said that wrong. With this specific thing, there are in the tenant attach world, remember, every tenant attach action you're doing in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center is really going to be reflected in Config Manager. So when you assign something in the Admin Center, you're going to need a collection to which you can assign it. And so you will need to decide which collections you want to replicate forward so that they're visible in the Admin Center for assignment, right? Um, that's what this one is all about. And then also discovering users from Azure AD and or on-prem AD is a big deal with tenant attach. Having high-speed integration. So really the way this whole thing works, as you'll see in a minute, is all of the administration activities in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center are synchronized to Config Manager servers near real time using an extension of the high-speed notification channel. I call it an extension because that's what makes sense to me. And you'll see this in a minute on the how it works slide as it comes up. Okay. So in terms of requirements, there's general requirements. And then as we go to the tenant attach um, individual things that you can do through tenant attach, there are requirements on each one of those as well, which we'll see. But here are the general requirements. So you need an account that has global admin permissions. Why do you need this? Because when you set up tenant attach, you're going to be asked to log in to your tenant. That account needs to be a global admin. So this is no different really than what's required with the Cloud Management Gateway when you set it up, or what's required with co-management when you set that up, right? This is kind of a one-time thing just to give access into that environment so that we can configure things. You also need a public cloud or access to configure this in the Azure public cloud. So as the time of this recording anyway, government cloud and the China cloud are not supported for this. You will need, and this is very, very critical, I want to emphasize this, your user accounts must be synchronized with Azure AD. Another way of saying this is when you try to do tenant attach actions, you have to be using a user context that is known to both Azure and Config Manager. So the security is kept in check all the way through, right? If you don't do that, then you'll get errors and you will be reminded quickly, oh yeah, I need to use an account that has the appropriate rights in Config Manager and also has a presence in Azure AD. And then in order to do tenant attached stuff, the user account that's trying to do those things needs to be able to have initiate Config Manager actions for remote task permission, right? Now, there's additional configuration potentially that might need to be brought to bear, or considerations if you have a CAS in the environment. I'm doing this from the perspective of a single primary site, but if you do have a CAS, bear in mind that that you might have a few other things that you need to consider. As well, I document the basically internet endpoints that need to be available for tenant attached to work. And then I also list out the endpoints that need to be accessible for certificate revocation list checking and OCSP, forget what that stands for, but OCSP checking to work as well, right? So bear those in mind. Now, as of Configuration Manager, oh, that's right, OCSP stands for Online Certificate Status Protocol. So as of Config Manager, I believe it is 2010, we will actually log in our service connection point the results of whether we actually have access to the links that we need, right? So if that's if you're on 2010 and you're having trouble with that, you can check in the service connection point log. All right. Now, so how do we actually use this? So in terms of tenant attach, I've listed out the capabilities that are in the console now that we will explore. Again, this is an ongoing process of adding things to the enterprise or Endpoint Manager Admin Center to allow you to do things through that portal that will be effective in the Config Manager environment. The question might be, hey, will we ever get to parity between what's available in on-prem Config Manager console and what's available in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center? And the answer is, I don't know. If we do, it'll be a long time. But the high priority, high usage components of Config Manager for sure will show up in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. And one thing that if you've noticed in our releases, the last ever since we've introduced Tenant Attach, we've added capabilities every single time, right? And honed capabilities every single time. So this is an area of active development. So, just consider that. That's another reason that at the very least you want to be aware of what's available here. Even if you decide not to use it, there may be something along the way that will make you decide, you know what, this is something I need to use. And in fact, there's an item coming up that I'll talk to you about. In fact, it's on the screen here. It's called Device Timeline. That is available in Tenant Attach. It's not as easily available in the Config Manager console, right? The information's there that you can get from the clients and so on. You can get the information, but we make it a nice view in the Tenant Attach when Tenant Attach is enabled in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, right? So we'll see each one of these as we go along. So how does this work? So I tried to do a diagram here to illustrate some of this. I mentioned the high-speed notification channel, that the Tenant Attach works by maintaining a high-speed notification channel between the Endpoint Manager Admin Center and your site server, right? We've always had for a long time now, we've had the high-speed notification channel from our site server through the management point or cloud management gateway to our Config Manager client. And so we've had actions continuing to show up in the Config Manager console where we can trigger device actions or other kinds of things, scripts and so on, run through that high-speed notification channel. And so similarly, there's another, I call it high-speed notification channel. It's not really named that, I don't think. But from the admin center through the service connection point into your site server, there are two logging components that will show you activity that happens here. So think of it this way. When you make a change here or request data to look at a view in your admin center here, we need to get that data. And so that's going to go through these components to your service connection point, to your site server, pull that data from the database, and then send it back. And that all happens very, very, very quickly, right? If we're doing a deployment up here, all of that needs to flow through and then ultimately get down to the Config Manager client. If we're running other things like CM Pivot, that has to go all the way through, the system and so on, right? So this is an attempt to help you visualize how all this stitches together, and then we will see these individual components in action. And the first thing we need to start with, though, is showing you how to go through and configure Tenant Attach if it's not configured. So the way I'm going to do this, there's actually two pathways to configure Tenant Attach, and it really depends on how your environment is configured now. So if you have co-management configured, then you will just simply go into the co-management node, go to properties, and then the configurations will be here. And I'll show them to you in just a second. If you don't have co-management configured, then you will go through the co-management wizard and enable the same options I'm going to show you here. Now, again, if you don't have co-management configured, you don't have to turn on co-management to enable Tenant Attach, but Tenant Attach is enabled through the co-management wizard. So either way, whether you're using the wizard or whether you have co-management turned on and you have this available, you're going to get to a screen where these settings are available. In my environment, because I do have co-management turned on, I'm going to go configure upload. And so there's a few options. One, you want to say, yes, upload to Endpoint Manager Admin Center, and then you decide, do I want all of my devices to go forward, or do I want a specific set of devices to go forward? So here's where you decide how you want to carry this forward. In my lab, I'm just letting everything go up to the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. You may not want to do that. It may be that you, for the bulk of your devices, you don't want to use Tenant Attach right now, but there may be a certain subset. I'm thinking of a customer that I've worked with who has a specific project that is separate and apart from the rest of their management needs or their mainstream of management in their organization. And those may very well be an interesting candidate for Tenant Attach. So they may decide to group those devices together and enable Tenant Attach for just that collection of devices And that's fine if you want to do that. Just know that as of, I believe it's either 2010 or 2103, I can't remember. But as of one of those, if you choose a collection to sync, then all of the child collections will sync as well, right? Which is really not a big deal because of limiting your top level collection you choose will likely be the one that you want all those devices anyway, so it shouldn't be a big deal. And then here, endpoint analytics. So endpoint analytics, you do not have to enable this, but if you enable endpoint analytics, or if you want to do things like timeline, you will need to enable endpoint analytics. So this makes me think of a question that I heard from a customer at one point when I was talking about some of this. And you know, we have a couple of things called analytics in the management environment. One is desktop analytics. Here it's endpoint analytics. And so the question came up, well, so what is the communication path for the data that's being sent to and from these devices for these things? And you know, for example, the question was in desktop analytics, does the device send its data directly to the cloud, or does it somehow route through the config manager infrastructure? So wanted to call that out. For desktop analytics, which is not part of this discussion, yes, the devices will send their data directly to the cloud, and we'll need to be able to have internet connectivity to be able to do that. Here, though, endpoint analytics, that data is routed through the config manager infrastructure. So don't get confused in the analytics things, but if you want to enable this analytics, then turn this on. And then there's a change, again, I believe it's 2010, I can't remember for sure, it's either 2010 or 2103, where we will set in the default client settings that endpoint analytics is enabled by default. So if that's not what you want, then you'll need to make sure you change that. If you have any custom client settings, which likely most people do, then you'll need to manage those. But in default client settings, we will now turn on endpoint analytics by default. And that's under the computer agent node in settings, which is right over here, right over here, right under client settings if I went there. So that's it, right? To turn it on, that's really all you need to do. And then the rest of these tabs are about initial configuration, and here's all the co-management stuff, right? Which we're not talking about. So that's enabling this and getting things started. So I just showed it to you in action by setting it up anyway. Well, okay, so I showed you setting it up on the config manager side, but I want to show you once you do that, it will actually create the connection between your on-prem or your config manager environment and the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. So let me show you that. So in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, if I want to confirm that everything is set up correctly, I'm going to go to Tenant Administration. And then under Tenant Administration, as soon as it comes up, in a moment, come on console, there it comes. Then I will be able to confirm, come on shift, there we go, under connectors and tokens, and under Endpoint Manager Config Manager, or Microsoft Endpoint Config Manager here, that my connection has been established and it's workable, right? So let this come up and you'll see a big green check mark saying everything is okay in just a second. There it comes, right? So we are connected, we're healthy, here's my site code, here's the last time I synced, and the name of the site, and so on, right? Now, another thing that you will start to see if this is all connected correctly is under devices now, under Windows devices, you will start to see non-MDM managed devices synchronizing in. Right? So you know it's a non-MDM device synchronizing in two ways. One is the managed by is not going to show Intune. It's going to show config manager. So here's a Windows 10 device, a few of them managed by config manager, but here are domain controllers that are managed by config manager and show up in this console. The only way they're going to show up in this console is because of tenant attach. Right? Now, if I go to any one of these devices that are in my environment, another thing that you will immediately have are these device actions that show up. So when we think of device actions, we're thinking about things in the Config Manager console like triggering hardware in inventory to collect now, triggering software inventory to collect now, triggering an immediate collection of discovery data, right? Triggering machine policy, user policy, an app evaluation cycle. So you don't have all of those here. You have these three, and you see them, right? So let me actually shift to that section because that starts to move into, hey, device actions, right? So device actions was the first entree into tenant attach. Whenever we first introduced it, that's what came along with it, and really nothing else, right? So in terms of requirements, there are some specific requirements. All of the general prerequisites requirements apply, but you also need to make sure that you're using a supported browser. You also need to make sure that the user that's attempting to do actions in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center has read permission to the device collection that the device is in, right? That user has an Intune role assigned. Now, this is a good time to take a bit of a tangent for a second, right? So the way, let me shift over and we'll go back to the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. So you see that I am actually focused on a device right now. And for a lot of what I'm going to show you today, I'm going to be focused on a device right now, right? So the question might come up, okay, you're going to go do these things. How do you target that action to take place on that device or on a group of devices? And so that certainly is a worthy discussion. So let's kind of talk about it for a second. In this case, for the device actions and some of the other things that I'm going to do for devices, they are already targeted by inference because they are tagged to the device, right? So whenever I go trigger a device action, they're going to happen on this device, just like they would if you were in the Configuration Manager console directly, right? But there are elements coming up, specifically the endpoint protection section, where you will be able to create deployments of settings in bulk and target them to groups of devices. And that's where the collection synchronization from Config Manager into the Endpoint Manager Admin Center will be key because you need to have those collections there that are targetable for those actions. And I will show them to you as we go along. That's my plan anyway, right? So I can just sit here and I can synchronize a machine policy, say yes, and this activity is immediately going through my high-speed channel to my domain controller, and it's triggering a policy cycle, right? How do I know that? Because I can actually go look at that machine. Let me go do that. Notice the time is 13 minutes after the hour. Let's go see what it is on the domain controller. Give me a minute. I'm going to pause and go get that machine up. Stand by. Okay, so I pulled up my domain controller. The time moved on just a minute. So let's go see. Still coming up. Hang on a second. Still, let's go see if the policy evaluation cycle actually happened. Right? So close that out. Let's go into my logs. I should have seen a policy trigger take place. In fact, I should have also seen activity through the high-speed notification channel. So let's just go check both. I'm going to start with the high-speed notification channel and CCM and logs. And so CCM notification agent should have triggered, and it should be with a current timestamp or current-ish timestamp. So here's my notification agent, and in fact, it hasn't happened yet. That's interesting. So let's see if anything is happening. Okay, so 13 minutes after the hour. So the time is different, but it did in fact get on this on the right date and the right time minute anyway. The hours are off, so I'm expecting that. But I did get this notification, right? So definitely received it very quickly within the same minute through the high-speed notification channel, and then if I look at policy agent, should the timestamp's off here, but we should see some activity here as it did a polling cycle, hopefully. And in fact, so this actually moved on, right? But we should see some activity up here if we just scroll up for a moment, where we're getting a request to do this. So here, submitted to the status agent. So this is starting to happen. Okay, keep going. So anyway, you see that it actually rolled through here. Okay, in a minute, right? So I just did that policy request. Now I should be able to do the same kind of thing and see activity in app enforce. Let me see if I can open this in trace. Here's trace. Let's just let it load, and then we'll go trigger. We see the last thing here is on the 9th. So I'm going to go trigger the app evaluation cycle. Say yes, right? And so let's go back over to the device, and just as quick as we can, hopefully we'll see some activity move, on this log in just a second if we are sufficiently patient. All right, so just pausing here for a second. All right. So that one's actually not triggering for me. That's interesting. I thought it might. I went and tried, just thinking it was something delayed with the communication from the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. I tried to do an app eval in the control panel directly back here, and that didn't work either. So I don't know what's going on with that. But either way, you saw the policy one work. I'll just show this one to you live since we're all here, and it'll probably make a liar of me now. But a second ago, it didn't cause anything to move. That didn't either. So I'm not sure why this particular log is doing that. But either way, you saw it work on the device action. So I'll just go ahead and pull this out of the screen at this moment. Right? Okay, cool. So what else we got? So client details is a piece as well. Again, this is going to be done directly on a device while you're in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. So in terms of targeting, we don't really think about that. Targeting is inferred because we're on the device. Like client actions, there are additional requirements for this. So all of the general requirements plus what you see on your screen, right? The same version, you need a browser that matches these requirements. You do need the user account synchronized to Azure Active Directory and discovered. If you're on 2103, that user account can be discovered by either Azure AD User Discovery or on-prem AD User Discovery. If you're on 2010 or earlier, it has to be discovered by both. And then the appropriate user account permissions as you see, right? So let's go actually see this work. So back to the admin center, and I'm on my machine, and if I look at the different elements along the left-hand side, here's client details. So I'm just going to click on that. It's going to take just a second because it's going to the config manager environment, and it's pulling the client details across the connectors or across the service connection point. And then we'll populate this out. This is taking a second, but it's generally doesn't take this long. I'm actually on a little bit of a challenged network connection at the moment, which is why this is taking a second for me. There it comes, right? So all of these details now show up, right? And this is exactly what you would see if you look in the Configuration Manager console directly with even a few more elements about it. Like, for example, we can see the boundary groups that this device is part of. So if we go into the Configuration Manager console here and then go to the same device, then we'll see not all of those details, but because they're in a couple of different places in the Configuration Manager console, but we will see the same similar kind of detail down here, right? And so on, right? So anyway, pretty easy, pretty simple. Again, who wants to use this kind of thing, right? It might be help desk admins that are trying to assist users whenever they call in with a ticket for a problem about something or other, right? And so bear in mind who would be the right audience for leveraging these things. Might not be the config manager team, might not be except for a limited section of folks like help desk or whatever other scenarios you have. But very interesting possibilities for those where it would apply. Okay, let me get this out of the way and just follow the slides. Application installs, right? So again, have our own requirements. So all general requirements plus you need to be on 2103 or later for this. The app needs to be deployed to a device or needs to be deployed to a user that is currently logged on to the device, right? And then you need these permissions to be able to make it happen. All right. And let me split this out. If you don't need to be on 2103 or later for app installs to work. If you're on 2103 or later, then these have to be true, right? But if you're on 2010 and earlier, then you do need to be at minimum on the update rollup for 2002. And if you want to do any user targeting at all, you need to be on 2006. And then for the config manager feature, you do need to make sure that approve application request is enabled. For the application itself, at least one app is deployed to the device and the administrator must approve option has to be set, and then these user account permissions, right? So don't be confused by that. You don't have to be on 2103 to use app installs, but there are differences between 2103 and 2010 and earlier, which is why I highlight them here the way I do. Okay, so let's actually look at this in the Intune console. In fact, I'm going to start a little bit differently. I'm going to show you in the Config Manager console first. And here, so if we go under Software Library and look under Applications, you'll see that I have several applications here. One of them is Notepad++, right? And I only have deployments of this one and this one, right? And for my deployments here, I'm targeting all users. And so that is a user-based deployment. I don't have users that I routinely deploy to in my environment. So I don't think I've ever even deployed this to the devices I'm targeting. It was set up for some testing I did a while back. Notepad++, though, is set up as a device targeted deployment, right? So if then I go into the Admin Center, what am I going to see when I go to install or go to application install? Let me get rid of this first and then go to, well, sorry, I went back too far. Go back here, and now I will go to applications, and what I see is one application. I see Notepad++. Why? Because it is a device targeted application. I would see the user targeted one if I were to do some extra things, right? But it is device targeted, and it will show up here in just a moment. You'll see that it has actually been installed, so the status is reflected accordingly that it has been installed successfully, right? If I want to see, and there's no more detail, and again, it's my lab, so things are always in a state of a bit of disarray, but you see that it is installed. I don't have other detail because I didn't configure other detail. I can see this hasn't worked for me. It actually worked today. Cool. So I can see additional detail if I want to. Here, I also can take additional actions, such as I can force install it. I can reinstall it. I can reevaluate this, right, if I want to, right? So controls that you have. And so again, I keep thinking of scenarios here. And what might be an interesting scenario is a user doesn't have an application that they should have received. And so they call the help desk. Help desk can come in here and they can immediately trigger the app install, right? So there's a previous session in the application series that I did where I talk about one way to install an application is to basically trigger it to install immediately over the high-speed notification channel without having to have a requirement of a deployment in place. I'm not going to go rehash that now, but that is absolutely a capability of Config Manager, and that's how this works, right? If I trigger the app install through here, it's going now. It's not waiting for policy. It's not doing anything like that. It's just rolling forward, right? And so some interesting possibilities with that and being able to interact here. I can trigger repairs, uninstalls, whatever, if those are options for me, right? Okay, so let's minimize this, move forward. What's next? So timeline. So I mentioned, well, let's do the requirements first. So you do need these elements to be in place. You do need endpoint analytics configured and these permissions, right? So I mentioned timeline in the list of things that you can do through tenant attach, and I mentioned that there's one thing that you're not going to get directly in the configuration manager console. You can certainly get the data, yes, because all we're doing is replicating existing event data forward in timeline, but you would have to go collect it yourself, right? In timeline, we will make it available in one place for you. And the goal of timeline is to allow you uh, additional information for troubleshooting to help you understand what's going on with devices, right? So if I go onto my list of options, here's timeline. And I just have a couple of things for my device right now. Actually, I have no results, really. It had results yesterday. That's interesting. Okay, let me refresh that and see. Whether we have results or not doesn't really matter. I'm curious though now, and I'm going to go try another of my devices and see if I can finally get results at all for timeline. Okay, let's try it here. And if not this one, then I'll try my other domain controller. Interesting. So let's go back and quickly try my other domain controller, see if there's anything at all. If not, that's fine. We'll move on. Timeline. Okay. So again, this showed something yesterday. I don't know why it doesn't today, but that's okay. No result. Interesting. Okay. So what timeline does is it will collect certain relevant events that happen on that device since it has been uh, published forward in tenant attach. And then those events, those details might be useful in troubleshooting what's going on the device. You know, say that there's an application that doesn't install, then this could be useful for helping bring some understanding as to, yeah, hey, that actually did not happen, or if there's reboots going on or whatever. I was going to show you this, but I can't because I don't have results. What happens though mechanically is that these events are collected and synchronized forward every 24 hours. And so they are kept, as I recall, for 30 days, I think. So they should definitely still be here. Don't know why they're not. But in terms of the events that we do collect, here's a list that is current as of this recording. So you'll see some things like application errors, application hangs, crashes that happen, shutdowns, whether they're intended or not intended, uh, changes in terms of boundary groups and configurations, repairs to the client, resyncs that go on, reboot requests, all sorts of things that can be interesting if you need to have additional insight as to what is going on the device, what might have happened, not happened, whatever. I love this one, firmware version change. So seen lots of customers of late where they've had issues because their firmware has been out of date. So if you use third-party updating and the catalogs that come from our partner vendors, then you can manage the firmware on devices just fine. If your help desk wants to confirm version has been updated of firmware, then you can see that here, right? So a very useful piece of tenant attach that I wish I could show you, but I can't. Resource Explorer. So Resource Explorer has these requirements. And as you probably know, if you're a Config Manager admin, Resource Explorer is all about what? Hardware inventory. And so let me show you Resource Explorer. So I think again of people that might need to have access for determining assets that are in the environment, or does this exist on a number of devices or whatever. And this is a perfect solution for being able to do that. So let me run back to my domain controller that I've been on this whole session and look at Resource Explorer. And so whenever I click on Resource Explorer, the tenant attach or the admin center is going through the tenant attach process to the site server, to the database to pull the hardware inventory data for this machine. And it will show it to you in the console here in just a second. And you'll be able to scroll through it just like you could if you were on the Configuration Manager console, right? Notice this as well, date is current. So you can use current date, you can use a custom date and pick whatever you want. So for example, if I wanted to use 6/1, and you saw that I pulled my list of inventory. This is current inventory. If I want to go back to 6/1, then we're going to go back to the database and pull historical information, right? Now, that historical piece does require 2103. The current inventory is available earlier than 2103 for sure. 2006, I think, is whenever we first introduced this. But you can go through here and you can see the details about what's going on in the environment. You know, just like you would if you were on the Config Manager console, right? So a useful piece here for sure, right? Okay, let me double check that. So yeah, 2006 or later is where you need 2103 if you are wanting historical inventory. Run scripts, okay? So run scripts has these additional requirements. So you need a minimum of PowerShell 3.0. Of course, if your script contains commands that require a later version of PowerShell, that is the now minimum version of PowerShell. The scripts, in order to show up through here, they need to already be created and approved. If they're not approved, they're not going to show up. And your user needs these particular permissions. So if I bring in the, let's start with the Config Manager console here, right? And I look under Software Library and I look at scripts. Then you see that I, in fact, have one script. It's approved and ready to go, right? So if I go bring up the Admin Center and look at Run Scripts, then you would expect maybe to see one script, right? So if we come to the scripts node, but you don't, no results. Why? Because this is a summary pane showing you what you have run and its status. I've not ever run this script, right? So if I do want to run the script, I can click on Run Script and it will show me the script. I can go out and I can run the script right now, no problem, right? So I'll run it. It's going to go through the high-speed notification channel. It's going to run that script on the device, and then I will, at some point, get notification back here as to the last runtime and different things on it, right? I don't even know if that script works, to be honest. It's just in there. I don't, and that quickly, right? So I'm running now, and at some point it will come back and say, hey, worked, failed, whatever. So an interesting way to interact with the environment. So here you go. Script succeeded. Good enough. Refresh this, and it says succeeded. So pretty easy interaction. All that through the notification, the high-speed notification channel down to the client, and also keeping that in sync with the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. And then here's another very good reason as to why you might want Tenant attached, and that is CM Pivot, right? Yeah, well, we talked about CM Pivot before in other sessions. We understand what we can do with CM Pivot through the Config Manager console. We understand also that we can use CM Pivot with a standalone version if you don't want the full Config Manager console, but you can do it here too, right? And to me, having these additional things that surround CM Pivot is a benefit versus just using the standalone tool. There are requirements that come along with it, like all of these. So PowerShell 4.0 is a minimum. If you want to collect data for any of these entities, PowerShell 5. And then here are your site versions and required permissions. So if you want to do this, then like with all of these, you would just simply go to the device and you would launch CM Pivot, right? And so I'm not going to go into CM Pivot greatly. I'll just show it because I've done that before. I'll just show this to you. And we can go look at this and run queries and no issue, right? Get results back. And so this is all flowing through that connected infrastructure, through these high-speed notification channels out to this device to go get these results and so on. And we'll see results here in a minute, error if we get it, whatever, and off we go, right? So CM Pivot, have it, and got an error. That's okay. Not not sure why, but that's okay. That's actually the first query I've ever tried to run CM pivot with the tenant attach. So you get the idea though, and we will leave it there. Now, endpoint security, we're shifting because everything we've done to this point is related to individual devices. Here, we're going to have the ability to take configurations for antivirus, firewall, security center integration, and deploy them to groups of devices. Now, I say groups, why? Because that's what we think about when we talk about the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. In reality, we're going to deploy these configurations to collections because we will need to synchronize collections forward so that they're available for assignment in Intune in these sections that require it, right? So here's some of the requirements for it. All general requirements plus you need these features available. So let me show this to you for a minute, right? And let's start in the config manager. Oops, that's the wrong one. That is my Hyper-V manager, sorry. Let's start in the config manager console and show you what you need to be prepared to set up and decide what you want synchronized. So I'm going to go into device collections. And there's one that, that I'm using just for demo. It's here. I'll just go to properties of it. All right. And on this collection, on every collection really, there's a tab called Cloud Sync. And you decide whether or not you want to make the collection available for assignment in endpoint security when you configure those policies. I actually thought this one was. Did I turn that off? I can't remember. Let's maybe it's maybe it's this one. I don't remember. Let me. But nevertheless, it's going to be the same regardless. You need to turn it on, right? And then you also might want to synchronize collection membership results to Azure Active Directory groups. Remember that thing that I told you about at the beginning of this discussion that I said, you know, this is a feature that's really cool with this whole tenant attach, and it's not really tenant attach, it's really cloud attach management and so on. That's this section, right? So in order for you to be able to assign anything to your configured policies in Intune for these endpoint security things, you need to make sure your collections are synchronized. And now that I see that neither one of those are synchronized, I wonder, did I turn that off at one point? I don't remember because I just finished an endpoint protection series and I may have cleaned up my lab as a result. But we will see in just a minute whenever we get to the endpoint protection portion of this in the Endpoint Manager console and see if I actually have any collections synchronized that I can target. So again, I just finished a discussion on this. There's well, it's a multi-part series on endpoint protection integration between Config Manager and endpoint protection capabilities. And there's also another series between Intune and endpoint protection, right? So I would encourage you, if you want some deep detail lowdown on those, to go look there. But I will just remind you, in the Endpoint Security Center, there's these three areas where we can implement configurations. I'm not going to show you all three, except here to list them out. There's antivirus, there's firewall, and then there's attack surface reduction, maybe, or endpoint detection and response. The section where you go actually do onboarding of your managed device to Endpoint Security Center. Let me just look at this one because I think this is the right one. But let's see. Go back. Well, that's just weird. Okay, let me try this again. The account I'm logged on as may not have rights to this particular section, but let's see. I'm going to create policy and select platform. Yeah, so here is the tenant attach version of this. And so I can just go select my profile. Here we go, create. And again, I'm not going to show you all the rest of them. I'm not even going to really show you this in detail, except to go through and start to create it. I don't care about the settings. I'm not going to detail them. I detailed them in the previous sessions, but I am going to show you here. Assignments is specifically collection. And I want to select collections to include. And here I do have both of these collections, non-Windows 10 systems, Windows 10 systems, synchronized forward. So I chose the wrong ones a moment ago. Let me just show you back in ConfigMgr. Here, non-Windows 10 systems. Okay, so that had to be one of the ones. Oops, I didn't show you that one, but it has to still be enabled, I would think, because it's showing up in the console, so Cloud Sync, and in fact it is. So good, right? I did not clean that up. Good. So I will then choose one of these collections and apply it accordingly. It will go down through the tenant attach infrastructure and get deployed to the device, right? If you don't have collections synchronized into Endpoint Manager using the section of the collection, the Cloud Sync tab, like I showed you in Config Manager, nothing is going to show up here, and you can't deploy anything to your environment, right? Okay. And that, folks, is kind of a review of what all the capabilities are for Tenant Attach right now. Expect the list to grow, right? So as you, if you're reviewing this video later and there's other versions, then there's probably going to be a few other things in there compared to what I showed you here. In terms of troubleshooting, so I've mentioned logs, right? Let's go back to in my case, my Config Manager site server, and I want to show you these logs specifically are going to be on your service connection point. And so if I go to my site systems and look, I need to make sure I know where my service connection point is. And here, I just happen to have it on my site server. And so my logs should be here on my site server. And so you see they are. Here's my notification worker log. But let's just go into my logs. CM. So here are my different logs for the connection through Tenant Attach. So I mentioned there's the CM Gateway Sync Upload Worker, which is right here. All right. So this log is going to manage the uploading and synchronizing to Endpoint Manager Security Center. So if I open this up, then you'll see a lot of things in here, and don't be alarmed by the exceptions and different things, because this is a lab and I have it on and off all the time. But you'll see some different things, such as an example might be next runtime, which will indicate right here, next runtime will be approximately at this time when we're going to go through and synchronize things, check things out, connect. Here's the infrastructure where we're connecting up. So I mentioned that we will show you in the logs what we're trying to connect to, making sure that it's okay, and so on. Here, we're looking at batching 0 records in my case because there's nothing to batch, but this is where we're communicating back and forth between Endpoint Manager Admin Center and the site server. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit on my notes so that I can remember not to forget anything. So whenever we do upload, that actually takes place about every 5, what is it? So when we do upload, it actually happens in 2 steps. So on the site server side, we're going to do it every 15 minutes. When the changes get up to the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, it'll take between 5 and 10 minutes for those to actually show up for you in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. All right, so back to the site server. So here we also have another log, and that is the CM Gateway Notification Worker. And so by the name, you probably can understand this is the component that will notify the site server of new configurations. And so let's go down and we'll search up if we have to. Okay, so let's see. Let me just search up to make it easier. And I will say up. Here we go. And let's see. We'll see things like received. new notification. So this will indicate that something just came across the channel and we need to, I'm going to search down from here, and we need to take action on it. So taking action on it would be things like validating, right? Validating basic notification details, validating admin service message. And I guess that's all for now, but you see those activities taking place. And then there's others like forwarding, right? Okay, let me go up to see that. But forwarding, remember, we have to, I guess it's not in this log. Let's see if there's one in the previous log. Forwarding is what we do when we receive one of these messages. We need to forward it on to the high-speed, if it's appropriate, forward it on to the high-speed notification channel so that we can take action on the client. I guess I'm not going to have one here. That's okay, but that's you saw the other messages here. And then once we get out of this section, that's where we move on to the BGB server. I'm not going to show you that because I've talked about that in other sessions. But you'll get into the BGB server log, which is on the site server, and so on. Management points is where that actually connects through. And that will manage the messages through the config manager specific high-speed notification channel. You'll see, starting to send push task or get one push task or things like that. And then on the client, you'll see the CCM notification agent and so on will handle that. In terms of kind of borderline troubleshooting and also tips and tricks, there are some common issues. One that I really wrote down, and that is you might see in the logs message, it may not work, and you may see in the logs unauthorized to perform client actions. If you see this, then the person trying to perform that action just doesn't have the required permissions in Config Manager to let them take that action. So just troubleshoot at that level. In terms of known issues, there is a scenario, it's kind of a corner scenario, where specific devices won't synchronize, and that would be if you have a PKI certificate on your distribution point, for example, and that PKI cert is shared with the client agent, then it's not going to be included in the tenant attached sync. Again, kind of a corner scenario. There's another one. If the config manager site is configured to require MFA, basically probably things aren't going to go really at all. The workaround is to just make sure that the provider is not using MFA, it's using the default Windows authentication level. And then last one, timeline. So in timeline, devices will send events once per day to the admin center. The only events collected will be those that are generated after the client receives the endpoint or enable endpoint analytics data collection policy. And then anything that's generated will be kept for 30 days. Again, mine were there yesterday. They're not there today. It hasn't been 30 days. Not sure, but that's kind of the way it works. And with that, we are done. A tour of tenant attach. Thought it was important. Hopefully you gleaned some really good information out of this and have an interest in pursuing it either in general or in specific scenarios. Either way, if you at least are aware of what it is, we've done our job here, so we will wrap it here and we will see you next time.